In this video, I want to talk to you about the blessing of separation. If I had another title for it, it would be a much needed separation. There are certain relationships in our lives that at some point are due for a separation. I'm not talking about those relationships that you have to fight for. Yes, there are relationships that you have to fight for. There are relationships that you have to preserve, that you have to do anything to make sure that you don't lose. But then there are relationships that are due for a separation. I'm talking about that one friend, or perhaps it is a significant other that you thought would be in your life forever, or maybe it is a family member, or maybe it is a business partner. There are some relationships that at some point are due for a separation. And in this video, we're going to talk about 3 reasons why a separation might be a blessing, why separation might be the one thing that you need in this season. I'm going to get this from a story that we find in Genesis 13 of a man called Abraham. You know him as the father of faith. And in Genesis 13, we see Abraham have a situation with his nephew Lot. And the situation stemmed from the fact that Abraham was expanding, he was growing. His wealth was growing and his nephew's wealth was also growing. So they had all of this livestock, they had all of these employees who were looking after their property, who was looking after their wealth. And at some point, the place where they lived was no longer enough to contain both of their growth. So both of them were growing at such a rapid rate that the land they were on became too small for both of them. And at this point, it is time to separate. And the reason why it was time to separate was because there started to be some conflict, non-stop conflict. I'll say to you right now that conflict might be an indication that it is time to separate. That's why we're talking about this. Because at some point, you know that relationship, there is certain conflict that just doesn't make sense. You understand what I'm talking about? I'm talking about you complain because of the way they close the microwave. You complain because of the way they chew. You fight about the fact that this one was 2 minutes late. And the little things become big things. And it seems that this conflict has no resolution. The more we try to resolve it, the worse the situation gets. We keep on fighting over and over again. You might see it at home. If you still live at home, you might see it at home because when you were younger, you could just listen to what your parents told you. But now that you're older, you can't stand their instructions. The place is becoming too small for both of us. For some of you, perhaps it's in a romantic relationship. You're starting to see that there is more friction than we have peaceful moments. We fight more than we laugh. It might be an indication that it is time to go our separate ways because no matter how much we try to resolve it, it seems that conflict always has a way of coming out of our relationship. So, with this being said, I want to pull 3 different reasons why you might need a separation. We see in the story of Abraham and Lot, when this started happening, Abraham came up with a solution and he said to his nephew, how about this? You choose whatever other land. If you go left, I'll go right. If you go right, I'll go left. Choose where you want to go and I'll choose whatever it is that you don't choose. What do you want us to do? Lot looks around and then finally comes to a decision where he chooses the plains of Sodom because it looked green. And he makes his way. And it is at this point where I'm going to pull these 3 different points that I know will be a blessing to you in understanding the necessity for separation in certain relationships. Number 1, separation now may cause a little pain to save us from something worse. In the story of Abraham, we see him trying to preserve his relationship with his nephew. The purpose of his separation from his nephew was him saying, listen, we're family. Let's not fight like this. Let's not have this grow into something unnecessary. Let's just go our separate ways now so that we can preserve our relationship. And we know this to be the case because later on, when Sodom was being destroyed, Lot was saved by Abraham. Abraham stood in the gap for his nephew Lot. And so I'm saying to you right now that it might be necessary for you to understand that at some point, perhaps you had to move out of home because you realized that you and your parents started fighting more and more. I'll tell you this. Personally, from a personal experience, my relationship with my parents became better when I left home. Because while I was still at home, as I was growing, there were certain things I wasn't understanding, and as I'm growing older, I'm starting to question I'm starting to question certain things. I'm starting to question certain rules. I'm starting to feel like I have my own rules that work for me, but I am still under their roof. And so there was endless conflict. And at that point, you understand that it might be necessary to go our separate ways so that we can save this relationship. It might be necessary to go our separate ways before something worse happens. Something worse for someone might be abuse. It might be that you start to see some signs that this could be leading to a place of physical abuse and other forms of abuse. And so separation right now might be uncomfortable, but since I saw the signs of abuse that I saw, I'm going to have to walk away. I'll deal with the pain and save myself from something worse. For some of you, it might be in a professional setting. In that workplace, you understand that at a certain point, it's necessary for me to leave, because the longer I stay, the more chances there are that I just might put my hands on someone in this place, and it could get worse than what it is right now. The point is, when conflict is no longer resolved, when there's no longer resolution, separation might be the final resolution. And number one, it might be to save us from something worse. Number two, separation might be necessary to save a relationship. I know couples that had to break up while they were dating and came back later to get married. And when that happened, it had to happen while they were dating, because while they were dating, both of them were not yet at a point where they were ready for each other. And so when they went their separate ways, they came back at a later stage when they were more developed, more matured, and more understanding of each other, and they were in a better place to make it work. And again, in the case of Abram, he was doing it to save a relationship. So he said, let's go our separate ways so we can save a relationship. When I left home, I had to leave home so that I could save my relationship with my parents. For certain people, you might have to leave a certain place so that you can preserve a relationship. Some of you might be in a business partnership and you know that you were friends before you were business partners, and now the money has gotten in the way, but the relationship means so much to you that you have to come to a point where you say, listen, take what's yours, I take what's mine, let's go our separate ways and remain friends so that we don't lose this relationship over something that is meaningless. Whatever the case might be for you, I'm saying to you, separation sometimes might be necessary in order to save a relationship. So number two, separation may be necessary to save a relationship. And number three, separation now may be necessary for growth. It may be necessary for you to separate from a certain person or a certain individual so that you can become what you are yet to become, so you can go to the next level. In the case of Abram and Lot, the Bible says that as soon as Lot left, as soon as they separated, Abram gets a vision from God, and God says to him, Abram, put your head up. Look to the east and the west. Look all around you. As far as your eyes can see, I will give that land to you. Go and walk the perimeter, and whatever you set your foot on, whatever your eyes can see, I will give it to you. And it's very interesting that this blessing comes after the separation. And not only does God say, I will give it to you, he says, I will give it to you and your descendants. At this point, Abram does not have a single child. But God says, you and your descendants, I will give this land to. And this happens after that separation. Because you see, this whole entire time, there had been conflict on this land. There had been conflict in this household. And where there is conflict, where there is no unity and no harmony, there is no blessing. We are standing in the way of blessing. And so I want to suggest to you that separation may be necessary for growth. Sometimes you break up with a certain person and you realize that your life just takes off. Life just takes off as soon as you break up with them. And you start to think that maybe they were bewitching you. They were not bewitching you. It's just that the two of you were standing in each other's way. You start to ask them, hey, listen, you said you had a grandmother who lives where now? Can you just remind me again? No, it has nothing to do with that. It just has to do with the fact that both of you were a hindrance to each other. Perhaps you were unequally yoked, and the separation was necessary so that both of you can start to grow in your own rights. And so now you start to excel right after you get rid of that relationship. Sometimes it might be a friend. You get rid of a certain friend, and all of a sudden things start to move forward. It's not that they were bewitching you. It's just that you were friends with a person you were not supposed to be friends with. It's just that both of you were standing in each other's way. Bad influences, or perhaps just no vision among the two of you. It doesn't matter what it is. The point is, it was necessary for you to separate. So separation now may be necessary for growth. So don't despise separation. When they say, I need to go, you say, all the best. I wish you well. In 1 John, we see the words of John that say, when he speaks about the people who were leaving the churches at the time, he said, these people left our churches, but they never really belonged with us. For if they belonged with us, they would have stayed with us. But when they left, it proved that they did not belong with us. So we're not fazed. We're not bothered. We're not discouraged by who leaves. It's okay. This just might be the separation that we needed so that we can move on to the next dimension. This just might be the weight that I needed to release so that I can take off. So with that being said, my friend, I know that it can be painful and I know that it can be uncomfortable, but do not despise separation. It just might be the blessing that you need.
When you change your thoughts, you change your life. This is Thoughts That Count with Poloko.